My name is Maribel Ward. I'm 30 years old. And apparently, choosing my career over an ultimatum makes me the villain in someone else's story. I'm writing this from my new apartment in Seattle, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of Puget Sound that still doesn't feel real when I wake up. Below me, ferries move slowly across the water like they know exactly where they're going. Above me, the sky is always doing something dramatic. Gray, silver, clear, honest. None of this was supposed to be mine, at least not according to him. A few months ago, I was living in Chicago with my boyfriend of 5 years, Marcus. We'd shared an apartment for 3 of those years. His dream apartment, technically. Walking distance from his job, 10 minutes from his parents, 5 minutes from his bar studio, his favorite cafe, his entire ecosystem. At the time, I told myself that was just how relationships worked. Someone had to give a little more, and I was flexible. I worked as a data analyst in health tech, remote-friendly, stable, predictable. I could adapt. So I did. We vacationed where he wanted. Holidays were always with his family in Wisconsin or his friends in Minneapolis. Even the car I bought last year, I wanted a Honda. Practical, reliable. He vetoed it, said it wasn't safe enough. His dad preferred Subarus. Subarus held value. I didn't fight it. Marcus always had reasons. Well-structured reasons. Calm explanations delivered with that wounded expression that made me feel selfish for even suggesting alternatives. And somehow, every compromise ended with me adjusting and him staying exactly where he was. I didn't notice the pattern until something finally mattered more to me than keeping the peace. The director of analytics position opened at a health tech startup in Seattle on a Tuesday afternoon. Machine learning applications for patient outcomes. Equity package. Leadership role. Salary jumping from $82,000 to $210,000. Life-changing doesn't even cover it. When I told Marcus I'd been invited to interview, he went quiet. Not angry, not supportive, just still. Then he said, "You're not seriously considering this." I laughed a little, thinking he was joking. "I'm absolutely considering it," I said. "This is my field. This is what I've been working towards since grad school." That's when he looked at me, really looked at me, and said the sentence that split my life in two. "If you take that job, we're done. I'm not leaving Chicago." I remember the way the room felt afterward. Heavy, like the air had thickened. He kept going. "My parents are here. My friends are here. My studio is here. If you love me, you'd stay." I tried to negotiate. Long distance for a year. Monthly flights. 2 apartments so he could visit whenever he wanted. I even offered to cover extra costs so the transition would be easier. He refused every option. It was stay or lose him. That night, lying awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, something clicked into place. Not loudly, quietly, terrifyingly clear. This wasn't about Seattle. It was about the fact that in 5 years, every major decision had gone his way. And now, the one time I asked him to bend, just a little, he chose control over conversation. I realized I'd become someone who needed permission to grow. So I made my choice. I accepted the job without telling him. Found a sublease through a company contact. Scheduled movers for a day he'd be at work. Left behind all the furniture we'd bought together, mostly his taste anyway. The morning I left, I placed an envelope on the kitchen counter. 2 months' rent. My key. A short note. "You told me if I took the job we were done. I believe you." I thought leaving would be the hardest part, that the moment I zipped my suitcase or shut the door behind me would break something open inside my chest, that I'd cry in the rideshare to the airport or panic halfway through the flight, wondering if I'd just detonated my entire life over a job title and a number on an offer letter. None of that happened. What happened instead was quieter, stranger. The days between accepting the offer and actually leaving Chicago felt suspended, like I was moving through water while everyone else stayed on land. Marcus went about his routines as if nothing had changed. Morning bar classes, evening dinners, casual conversations about groceries and weekend plans that no longer included me. He never asked if I'd made a decision. I don't think he believed I would. At night, he slept easily. One arm flung across my side, familiar and heavy. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the past 5 years with a clarity that felt almost cruel. Moments that had once seemed small now lined up neatly, forming a pattern I couldn't unsee. The way my promotions had always been framed as nice but temporary, while his career moves were treated as immovable facts. The way my flexibility was praised, while his refusal to budge was labeled boundaries. The way every time I pushed back, the conversation somehow ended with me apologizing for making things difficult. I wasn't angry yet. I was just awake. I signed the Seattle lease during my lunch break, hands steady, heart oddly calm. A furnished sublease near the water. 6 months. Enough time to see who I was without negotiating my existence around someone else. The movers were scheduled for a Wednesday. Marcus taught a morning class that day and usually stayed late for coffee with friends afterward. I told myself I'd cancel if I felt even a flicker of doubt. The flicker never came. I packed only what was mine: clothes, books, my laptop, a framed photo of my sister and me that had somehow survived every apartment move since college. I left behind the sectional he'd insisted on, the dining table his parents had helped pick out, the art prints he loved. It felt important to do it cleanly, no ambiguity, no room for revisionist history about what I'd taken. The letter took the longest. I wrote and rewrote it until it was almost clinical. No accusations, no pleas, just the truth, reflected back exactly as he delivered it to me. You told me if I took the job we were done. I believe you. I slid 2 months' rent into the envelope because I didn't want money to become another weapon. I left my key on top because I didn't want him to say I disappeared. When I closed the door behind me, the apartment didn't echo. It didn't protest. It just stayed. The drive to the airport felt unreal. Chicago traffic crawled as usual. The skyline looked the same. People went about their days completely unaware that something enormous had shifted inside one very ordinary woman in the passenger seat of a rideshare. On the plane, somewhere over the Rockies, I finally felt it. Not regret. Relief. The kind that settles into your bones when you realize how tense you've been for so long that you forgot what neutral feels like. Seattle greeted me with rain and glass and possibility. Corporate housing. New badge. New calendar invites with people who didn't know me as someone's girlfriend first. I threw myself into work because it was easier than checking my phone. I told myself to expect angry texts, voicemails, maybe a late-night call demanding explanations I'd already given. What I didn't expect was silence. For almost 48 hours, Marcus said nothing. Then my phone lit up, not with questions, with a story he'd already decided to tell. And I was about to learn that walking away quietly doesn't stop someone who needs to win. It just gives them a blank page. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a text from Marcus. It was an Instagram notification from someone I barely talk to anymore. I was sitting at my temporary desk in Seattle, half listening to a project kickoff call, when my phone buzzed. I glanced down automatically, expecting a Slack message or a calendar reminder. Instead, it was a DM. Hey, are you okay? No context, no explanation. I typed back, yeah, why, and went back to the meeting. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. I just saw Marcus's stories. I'm really sorry. My stomach dropped. I muted my mic, opened Instagram, and tapped through his profile. We still followed each other. I hadn't thought to change that yet. The first story loaded slowly. A black screen, white text. Sometimes you don't realize the person you loved was using you until it's too late. Next slide. A mirror selfie. Marcus's jaw was tight. His eyes looked strained. Not wet, not spilling over, just glossy enough to suggest restraint. The kind of expression that says I'm holding it together rather than I've fallen apart. 5 years of supporting someone's career, just to be abandoned when it became inconvenient. My chest tightened. Another slide followed. Financial abuse doesn't always look the way you expect. That one made my hands go cold. By the time the meeting ended, my inbox was already filling up. Friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Former coworkers, a cousin of his I'd met exactly twice. Are you safe? I didn't know you were going through this. How could you just leave him like that? I stared at my phone, trying to understand how we'd gone from an ultimatum he delivered calmly in our kitchen to this version of events where I was suddenly a calculated villain. Later that night, he posted again. This time not a story, a permanent post. Marcus sitting on the edge of our old couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. No tears. No collapse, just tension, bottled and curated. The caption was long, carefully vague. When you build your life around someone and they drain your savings, control the finances, and disappear the moment they get a better offer, it changes you. Something hot flared behind my ribs. We never had joint savings. Not once. From the beginning, Marcus had insisted we keep finances separate. He framed it as modern, independent, healthy. We split rent, utilities, groceries, every dinner, every vacation, everything tracked through Venmo. I still had every record, but his version traveled faster than facts ever do. The next morning, my phone rang. His mother. I didn't answer. An hour later, his father emailed me. The subject line read, "We need to talk like adults." He accused me of abandoning Marcus without notice, claimed I'd benefited from his emotional labor, suggested a $40,000 transition payment would be reasonable, given the damage I'd caused. I archived the email. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, my mom called. Her voice was shaken in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Maribel," she said carefully, "Marcus came by today." My stomach dropped. "He showed up," she continued. "He sat on the porch for hours. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just talked about how lost he was, about how blindsided he felt, about how you controlled everything." That word again. Controlled. "Is any of that true?" she asked quietly. For a moment, just one, doubt tried to creep in. Then I opened my laptop, found the screenshot, the ultimatum, word for word, time-stamped. I sent it to her. She called back 5 minutes later. "Oh," she said, "he lied about everything." But Marcus wasn't finished. Because when controlling the relationship stopped working and controlling the narrative started cracking, he reached for something heavier. The law. I told myself I wouldn't respond. That feeding the story would only give it oxygen. That truth, documented and boring, would eventually outweigh a narrative built on implication and emotion. For about 48 hours, I almost believed that. Then the doubt crept in. Not from Marcus, but from the people around him. A mutual friend I trusted messaged me late one night. "I don't want to take sides," she wrote, "but he seems genuinely shaken. Are you sure you didn't maybe underestimate how much he depended on you?" I read the message 3 times. Depended on me. The language was subtle, careful, no direct accusation, just enough to tilt the frame, enough to make me replay moments I'd already examined and wonder if I'd missed something obvious. That's the thing about gaslighting when it's done well. It doesn't tell you that you're wrong. It asks questions that make you doubt your answers. I opened my notes app and started listing facts. Not emotions, facts. We split rent evenly. Utilities, split. Groceries, split. Vacations, split. Savings, separate accounts, always. I pulled up Venmo, scrolled. Months, years. Line after line of green check marks and exact halves. Dinner, electric bill, internet, weekend trip, refunds, reimbursements, clean, boring, undeniable. I wasn't panicking yet, but I was preparing, because Marcus wasn't slowing down. The posts escalated. He stopped saying sometimes and started saying when you're abused. He started resharing comments from strangers calling him brave, strong, a survivor. Someone even tagged a local mental health nonprofit and thanked Marcus for speaking his truth. That one made my stomach twist. Truth doesn't need a spotlight. The spotlight is for performance. Then came the GoFundMe. Help Marcus rebuild after financial abuse. The description was long, emotional, and just vague enough to avoid direct claims he couldn't prove. 5 years of sacrifice, career support, emotional labor, abandonment. By the end of the first day, it had raised $62. That number stuck with me, not because it was small, but because it told me something important. People who actually knew him weren't buying it. Still, the pressure reached places I couldn't ignore. My phone rang during work hours now. Numbers I didn't recognize. Voicemails left in careful, trembling tones. "This is Marcus's aunt. We just want to understand why you would do this to him." One email came from someone claiming to be a lawyer, though there was no firm signature, no letterhead, just a warning that domestic partnership obligations could apply even without marriage. That was the moment my calm cracked. Not into fear, into clarity. I forwarded everything to myself. Screenshots, emails, voicemails, links, dates, times. I didn't respond. I documented. 2 days later, my building's front desk called up to my temporary apartment. "Maribel, there's a courier here for you." The envelope was thin, official looking. My name printed neatly across the front. I didn't open it right away. I sat on the edge of the bed, stared out at the water, and waited for the feeling people describe. Dread, panic, the sense that the floor is about to give way. It didn't come. When I finally tore it open, the words were exactly what I expected. Small claims court. Marcus was suing me. Emotional damages. Unpaid domestic partnership obligations. Total claimed $8,000. I laughed once, a short, sharp sound that surprised even me. Not because it was funny, because it was inevitable. I forwarded the filing to my company's legal contact, not even sure what I was asking for. An hour later, my phone rang. "Maribel," the attorney said gently, "this is frivolous, but you do need to show up." 3 weeks. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and felt something settle. He wasn't trying to win money. He was trying to force me back into his orbit. And this time, the stage wasn't social media. It was a courtroom. Flying back to Chicago felt like stepping into a life I'd already shed. I took a day off work, half expecting guilt or tension from my new team. Instead, my director waved it off like it was nothing. "Handle your personal stuff," she said. "We've got you covered." No sighs, no implications, just trust. That alone felt like a quiet rebuke of everything Marcus had ever framed as normal. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant. I arrived early, dressed plainly, carrying a slim folder that contained nothing but facts. Bank statements, Venmo records, screenshots, receipts, dates, times. I didn't need a performance. Marcus arrived 10 minutes late. He walked in carrying a thick, overstuffed binder, one of those 3-inch ones with plastic sleeves and color-coded tabs. His father followed closely behind him, already scanning the room like this was a moral battlefield he'd come prepared to defend. Marcus didn't look at me. He set the binder on the table with a kind of ceremony, squared his shoulders, and exhaled slowly. Not a breakdown, not panic. Controlled, contained. The posture of someone preparing to tell a story. When the judge called the case, Marcus went first. What followed barely resembled the relationship I'd lived in. He spoke about sacrifice, about emotional labor, about how I'd managed the household finances because I was better with numbers, a claim that fell apart the moment it left his mouth. He said I'd isolated him, pushed him to rely on me, then disappeared without warning. His father tried to interject more than once. The judge shut that down quickly. "This is not a lecture hall," she said evenly. "Sit down." When Marcus finished, he looked drained. Not devastated, drained. Like someone who'd just completed a rehearsed monologue and was waiting for applause that didn't come. Then it was my turn. I didn't speak much. I handed over the documents. The judge flipped through them slowly. Bank statements showing separate accounts, Venmo histories with precise splits, utility bills, rent receipts, the screenshot of the ultimatum text. She paused there. "Is this your phone number?" she asked Marcus. "Yes," he said. "And did you send this message stating that if Ms. Ward took the job, the relationship would be over?" Marcus hesitated. Then, quietly, "Yes." The judge nodded once. "Case dismissed. 15 minutes. Marcus froze. He started talking, fast now, about how the legal system doesn't protect people like him, about manipulation, about how evidence can be curated. The judge stood. "Court is adjourned." His father had to guide him out by the arm. I sat there for a moment after they left, breathing in the silence. It wasn't victory I felt. It was release. Later, at a coffee shop near the airport, I met a mutual friend who'd stayed neutral through everything. She looked uneasy, fingers tight around her cup. "There's something you should know," she said. And then she told me. Marcus had been calling my former boss, trying to blacklist me, warning people about my pattern, claiming I was unstable, irresponsible, dangerous to work with. My phone buzzed before she finished speaking. An email. Maribel. "I received a very strange call from Marcus today. I want you to know it was completely inappropriate. If you're ever interested in consulting remotely, we'd love to work with you again. Your departure was a loss for us." I stared at the screen. His attempt to destroy my reputation had done the opposite. As my plane lifted off that night, Chicago shrinking beneath the clouds, I understood something with terrifying clarity. Marcus hadn't wanted me back. He wanted control restored. And when the courtroom took that away, he was running out of moves. Seattle welcomed me back with steady rain and an inbox full of calendar invites. I landed late, exhausted in the way only emotional whiplash creates, and half expected the momentum I'd built to wobble while I'd been gone. Instead, nothing had shifted. The projects were still moving. My team still looped me in. No one asked invasive questions or treated me like a liability who'd needed time off to clean up personal messes. At stand-up the next morning, my director nodded at me and said, "Glad you're back." That was it. No drama, no judgment. I realized how deeply Marcus's version of reality had trained me to expect consequences for existing as a whole person. Work accelerated. The project I'd been quietly contributing to since my first week suddenly moved into a more visible phase. Stakeholders wanted numbers, forecasts, scenarios. I found myself leading conversations instead of shrinking inside them. At night, when the city went quiet, I replayed the court scene in my head, not with anger, but with a strange sense of distance, like watching a documentary about a life I no longer lived. Marcus, meanwhile, was unraveling. His social media cadence slowed, then turned erratic. Stories posted at odd hours, Captions that contradicted earlier claims. Comments disabled, enabled, disabled again. The GoFundMe stalled at $62. Then it vanished. A mutual acquaintance texted me out of nowhere. "Did you hear Marcus got fired?" I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. No. Apparently, he'd been missing shifts at the boutique he worked at, calling in late, leaving early, posting Instagram stories from the bathroom during work hours, pensive captions about trauma layered over shaky mirror shots. Management had given him multiple warnings. Eventually, they'd stopped. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something colder. I'd once built my schedule around his classes, his hours, his rhythms. I'd believed his instability was temporary, contextual, caused by circumstances. Now I was seeing it without proximity, without the softening effect of love, and it was stark. About a month later, I met Daniel. It wasn't dramatic. No sparks flying across a crowded room. We were both standing near the coffee table at a professional networking event, complaining quietly about bad conference pastries. He worked in product strategy. Different company, different world. He asked questions and waited for the answers. When I mentioned I'd moved recently, he didn't assume why. When I talked about my job, he didn't frame it as something that existed alongside his life, but as a thing with its own weight and gravity. We started meeting for coffee, then dinners, slowly, intentionally. I told him about Marcus on the third date, not in detail, just enough context to explain the boundaries I was careful about now. Daniel listened, didn't interrupt, didn't try to solve it. At the end, he said, "That sounds exhausting. I'm glad you chose yourself." No judgment, no defensiveness, no competition. It was unfamiliar. Then, 2 weeks later, my building's concierge called. "Maribel, there's a man here asking for you, says it's urgent." My stomach dropped. I knew who it was before she said his name. Marcus had flown to Seattle, and this time he wasn't hiding behind screens or court filings. He wanted to talk. I didn't let Marcus upstairs. That felt important. I asked the concierge to tell him I'd meet him in public. Somewhere bright, somewhere neutral, somewhere with witnesses and exits. We chose a coffee shop 2 blocks from my building. Glass windows, morning crowd, the kind of place where conversations stay measured because other people can hear you breathe. When I walked in, Marcus was already there. He looked thinner, not frail, just stripped of the confidence that used to pad him out. His jaw was set, posture rigid, like he was holding himself together by force of habit alone. He stood when he saw me. "Maribel," he said, like the name still belonged to him. We sat. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. He stared at the table. I stared at his hands. They were clenched, not shaking, controlled. "I just wanted a real conversation," he finally said. "Not lawyers, not courtrooms, not Instagram." I waited. "I was testing you," he added quickly, as if momentum mattered. "I needed to know if you'd fight for us, if you'd choose us when it mattered." I looked at him. "You filed a lawsuit against me," I said calmly. "That wasn't a test." He flinched, not emotionally, but strategically, like he'd misjudged the opening move. "I was desperate," he said. "I didn't know how else to get you to listen." "I listened," I said. "You told me if I took the job, we were done." He waved a hand, irritated now. "You know I didn't mean it like that." "I know exactly how you meant it." He leaned forward. "We could start over here. I could find something in Seattle. We could rebuild." I shook my head. "You spent months telling people I abused you, that I stole from you, that I destroyed your life. There is no rebuilding after that." His jaw tightened. "Then you owe me something," he said. 5 years isn't nothing. I invested in you." That word again. Invested. "I didn't waste your time," I said. "You chose to give an ultimatum instead of having a conversation. Everything that followed came from that choice." He sat back, eyes hard now. "Fine," he said. "Then I'll make sure people here know who you really are. I'll tell your company, your friends, anyone who'll listen." I felt it then. Not fear. Clarity. "You tried that in Chicago," I said evenly. "It didn't work. Try it here and you'll just prove exactly why I left." He stared at me, like he was searching for the crack that used to open when he pushed hard enough. That's when the door opened. Daniel walked in. He spotted me through the window, hesitated, then came over. Calm, grounded, no hesitation. "Hey," he said gently. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, and meant it. Daniel introduced himself to Marcus with polite neutrality. No posturing, no tension, just presence. Marcus looked between us. Something shifted in his face. Not anger. Defeat. Because I think, in that moment, he understood that I wasn't alone anymore, and more importantly, that I didn't need to be. "You'll regret this," he said finally. But his voice lacked conviction. He stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked out without looking back. I watched him go, feeling nothing I'd expected to feel. No triumph. No grief, just the quiet certainty that this chapter was finally closing, and that the life I was building didn't require permission anymore. After Marcus left this coffee shop, I sat there longer than I needed to. Daniel asked if I wanted to go somewhere else, if I wanted company, if I needed space. No assumptions, just options. I told him I was okay, not in the way people say it to end a conversation, but in the way that surprises even yourself when you say it out loud. Because I was. Marcus didn't text. He didn't call. He didn't try to follow up with another version of the same story dressed in different words. As far as I know, he flew back to Chicago that afternoon. That was the last time I saw him. The updates I heard later came secondhand. Mutual friends. Casual mentions that drifted into conversations and then out again. The GoFundMe never came back. The Instagram captions shifted tone. Less accusation, more reinvention. Words like healing, survivor, learning to trust again. He started dating someone new, a woman in crypto apparently. The posts were glossy, carefully curated. Proof of life more than proof of growth. I didn't block him. I didn't need to. Seattle kept moving forward, and I moved with it. At work, the project we'd been quietly preparing finally got approval. Phase 2 trials. Expanded scope. Bigger impact. The kind of work that reminds you why you chose this field in the first place. Not for the title or the equity, but because the numbers matter. My stock options hit their first vesting milestone the same week. I stood by my window that morning, coffee in hand, ferries cutting across the water below, and felt something settle into place that had nothing to do with money. Stability. Not the fragile kind that depends on someone else's comfort. The real kind. Daniel and I started talking about getting a place together. Not as a given, not as a deadline, but as a question we both had the space to answer honestly. Mountain views. Commutes that made sense for both of us. A life built with discussion instead of demands. Sometimes, late at night, I replayed the moment Marcus gave me the ultimatum. If you take that job, we're done. At the time, it had sounded like fear dressed up as certainty. Now I understood what it really was. A condition. And here's what this whole experience taught me. When someone gives you an ultimatum, believe them. They've already decided that their comfort matters more than your future. That love is leverage. That partnership is conditional. The right person doesn't hold your life hostage to get their way. The right person doesn't rewrite reality when you choose growth. The right person doesn't file lawsuits, sabotage careers, or perform victimhood when control slips through their fingers. The right person says, "This scares me, but your dreams matter too. Let's figure it out together." Every morning I wake up in Seattle, I'm grateful I chose the life I wanted instead of the one someone else demanded. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be controlled.